In the spring of 1961, I was a 22-year-old school teacher in Chicago. And there isn't time to tell you everything about my experience, but I want to tell you a little bit about it. Why did I go on the rides? One day I picked up the Chicago Sun-Times. That was the paper I subscribed to in Chicago. And I saw a picture of a burning bus. And I read the story. And I said to myself, how can this happen in our country? How can I have to go? I had to wait until the school year ended. I paid my roommates, I gave them money for rent for 2 months. I paid for July and August. I left money for the utilities, and I packed my bag. I decided I had to bring something to read, not knowing that, of course, they took all your belongings away from you when you go to jail. I took the Bible, King James Version of the Bible, and the collected works of William Shakespeare. I figured that would keep me in good stead for the whole summer. I went with Jean Herrick, whose daughter is here. I knew Jean slightly because we lived in the same neighborhood and belonged to some of the same organizations. I didn't want to tell my father that I was going. My father lived back here in New Haven. I knew he would argue with me and try to convince me not to go. And rather than have an argument with my father, I simply sent him a postcard saying, dear Daddy, if you don't hear from me for the next 2 months, it's because I'm in jail in Mississippi. Jean and I traveled together with a young man from Chicago. We went to Nashville, where we took some training in nonviolence. We role-played and got ourselves used to what might happen to us while we were there. We also learned how to fall down and roll up in a ball so that nobody could kick you in the stomach or kidneys, or, you know, we wanted to protect those parts of our body. We then traveled to Montgomery, Alabama, where we stayed in Reverend Abernathy's house. And Reverend Abernathy's house had been bombed. And so I was very nervous. I was nervous about what was going to happen the next day. I was also nervous just being in the house. There were floodlights around the house and people patrolling to make sure that we didn't get bombed again. The next morning, we left, the 3 of us from Chicago, joined by 5 young men from New York City. We got on a Trailways bus and we went to Jackson. When we got to Jackson, there was a crowd waiting. Fortunately, they did not attack us, but they made a lot of noise. They were shouting and screaming at us. And as soon as I got off the bus, Jean and I were seated up near the front. When we got off the bus, I looked for the sign saying white waiting room. And Jean looked for the sign saying black waiting room. I'm sorry, not black, colored. That's what we were then. I'd forgotten. We've had so many names. I walked in, and the first person to accost me was a man named Captain Ray. And Captain Ray had arrested, during the spring and summer, he arrested over 400 Freedom Riders, which must have made his life very difficult. He must have been away from home a lot, because he met every bus and every train coming into Jackson. We went to the city jail in a paddy wagon, and we spent the night there. The next morning we went to court, and we were very quickly found guilty. It was so quick I didn't even realize what was happening. We spent the next night we spent in Hinds County Jail, and the following day they put us in paddy wagons and drove us to Parchman. That's a maximum security prison. And the reason they had us there was that there were so many Freedom Riders. All the spots were taken in the city jail. all the beds were taken in the county jail, and they had to put us somewhere. So we rode maybe a couple of hours up to Parchman. When we got there, they confiscated all writing material, because they had intended to keep a journal, and they took my books, and I nearly cried. They put us in cells that were, the women, I don't know much about the accommodations for the male Freedom Riders, but the women were all kept in one cell block. And our cells were approximately 9 by 12 feet, double bunk beds, a toilet, and a face basin. And that's where we stayed for July and August. We had no visitors except for the clergy. A Baptist minister, a white Baptist minister, came and walked up and down the cell block, and he preached to us about how evil we were, and that the Bible said that the races were meant to be separate. Then the Roman Catholic priest came. He didn't take any sides, he didn't say anything personal, but he did give communion to everybody who was Catholic. And then the one I liked best was the rabbi. The rabbi came up from Jackson, and he took our names, our parents' names, and he wrote to every parent and said he'd seen us on such and such a date, and that we looked fine, we were in good spirits. So this is very courageous of him, because a couple of years later, his synagogue was bombed. So the same people who didn't like blacks also didn't like Jews. What did we do to keep busy? We did a lot of singing, played a lot of board games. Two girls who knew how to play chess used the toilet paper from her cell, and every Sunday we were given a pencil and 19 lines we could write home. So every Sunday, 2 or 3 girls would take some of the lead out of the pencil so that we could write to one another. We could communicate with one another without the jailer knowing what we were talking about. So these girls, they played chess. They made a chessboard out of the toilet paper, and they wrote their moves on, and we passed them from cell to cell. So they had a game that went on all summer. 2 lawyers were arrested. They gave us law classes. We pretended we were first-year law students, and they told us a lot about our case and other civil rights cases. My cellmate was like Jean, who had a child, and Heidi on the way. I lost my train of thought. Oh, my cellmate, yes. My cellmate was a black woman, because they kept you segregated by race. Except one cell got integrated, because there was a very fair-skinned black woman who told them that she was white. And they couldn't tell. So she integrated the cell block. But my partner, my cellmate, was a black woman in her 30s. She had children, but her husband, who was a musician, he stayed home in New Jersey and took care of the children so that she could go on the Freedom Rides.
Wow.
Things are very different now, but I'm not sure they're better. We have terrible unemployment problems, educational problems, neighborhood problems. I'm not sure things are better. It was easy to go on the Freedom Ride because you were attacking an enemy that you could see. You could see the sign saying white. You could see the sign saying colored. Well, how do you fight today? How do you fight today to change the economy? How do you get jobs for people? How do you get people to stay in school and learn things that they need to learn so that they can get jobs? So the problems are much more difficult now. Ours was the easy part, and I'm hoping young people will figure out a way or analyze the problem and figure out what they can do now, because it's not easy now. And by the way, in addition to having no books, no journals, we had no radios, no TVs, no visitors except for the 3 clergymen. I'm choking up here. But I would say we kept our spirits up mainly because we kept our spirits up because we wanted to, we knew what we were doing was right. And every time new Freedom Riders came, they would bring us the news from the outside world because we had no newspapers, we didn't know what was going on. And during the time I was in jail, the Berlin Wall was built, the Russians sent up a cosmonaut, and a little boy was born in Honolulu. And that was Barack Obama.
We've honored the legacy of the early caretakers of the civil rights movement, and what areas need more work in our journey to fulfill the dream.
Who would like to answer to start? Would you like to start? We'll let the youth start speaking.
It's a hard question. The best way to honor the people who went before, like me, is for you to be active now. Learn as much as you can to be involved in different organizations. And when you see prejudice, when you meet prejudice, stand up. But you have to get in groups and organizations because no one can do anything alone. I was just one of over 400 people who were jailed that summer. If I had done that by myself, nothing would have happened. But the fact is, we kept it in the news. The president was embarrassed because he had invited Khrushchev he was going to meet with Khrushchev. And so you need publicity. You need people who are willing to do all the nitty-gritty work. But I realize the problems are more difficult now because how do you attack unemployment?
Well, as far as my generation, I think still, we still have a long way to go as far as honoring the people who came before us and who've actually done something to contribute to this cause. I feel as though areas where it is predominantly, Hispanic and African American areas do need a lot of work and they need change. We need more motivation in schools. We need certain different programs that would encourage kids to stay in school and to actually get active in the communities instead of the circumstances that we have now.
I believe that many of us in this room and probably activists all over the country honor the legacy of the civil rights movement every day, but we're still a minority, and that's a problem. And I think that the main problem that we see here and we see in the whole country is that we keep fighting each other. Instead of looking up and fighting the people at the top that are hoarding the power and hoarding the money, we're all, let's be honest, there's still a lot of tension between the black community and the immigrant community. There's still a lot of tensions in the neighborhood. We have working people fighting middle class discriminating poor people because they don't feel like they're in the same boat. And we are. 80% of this country is just we are just fighting for 20% of the wealth of this country, while 20% of the country like keeps 80% of it. We have to just, I believe that like the best way that we have to keep honoring and bringing more people is first get organized. Get organized and like start like talking to our neighbors, talking to our family, and then stop fighting with each other. Put our prejudice aside and forget like forget swallowing what the media is telling us and putting us against each other and start fighting the people on top.
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me here. I was introduced as State Representative Gary Holder-Winfield, chair of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus. Before I did that, I was an activist and organizer, and that's what I prefer to be introduced as. And the reason for that is because it informs the way that I think about it. And so the question is, have we done what we need to do? And I agree with you, activists do some things to honor that legacy. But I think even amongst that community, we fail too much of the time. And I think it's because it's easy to take on the title of being an activist or organizer, but it's not so easy to actually attain that mantle. And so I think what you see happening is we've spent a number of years iconizing Martin Luther King and some of the people in the movement, and that's allowed us to separate ourselves from them. Because if they're an icon, it's very easy to say, well, how can I do what they did? And so when we talk about Martin Luther King's dream, we don't really ever stop to analyze this dream and what this dream is. And the dream is Martin Luther King's dream, but it's also a dream that's been around for a long time. It's the foundation of at least my religious philosophy, which is to say, you just treat your neighbor like you want to be treated. And it's the story of the road to Jericho. And people think that story is really about, you pick up the person on the road. It's really about reimagining who your neighbor is. And so therefore you operate differently. And I think if even amongst our activist communities, we began to do some more analyzing of what the civil rights movement really was about, we'd operate better. So that's the beat.
Question is, what do you think can be done to educate and encourage youth of today?
Well, I would like to see every adult mentor a child. Take responsibility for someone outside of your own family. Check up on how they're doing in school. Talk with them about life. Talk with them about history. I think mentoring is the main thing, one-on-one relationship.
I think we need more programs in schools to educate like the youth, because if they're educated and they know about their history, I feel as though they'll be more determined to get involved.
I usually believe that organizing is the solution for absolutely everything. And I do believe that. I believe that we have to expose our youth to the movement. I think that events like this are great things where we show youth what can be achieved and what can be done. I think that there's this romanticism about the movement that we see on the media and even on history books where we make our youth believe that all these movements happen spontaneously. Like someone sent a tweet and 1,000 people rise in Egypt and got rid of a dictator, or someone just stood on a corner with a sign screaming for freedom and suddenly millions of people joined them. And even though that sounds really nice and inspiring, it's not true. You need to create a structure. You need to create a group that is so strong that when our enemies start hitting us, we can give each other strength. And my personal, I grew up in Chile, and I was born and grew up during dictatorship, and the youth movement was what got us like freedom and got us back to democracy. It was the universities and the students who like got organized and suffered through all that struggle. And what kept them strong and kept them like resisting torture and incarceration and like constant beat up by the government was the structure they had with each other, the organizing that they did, and how they support each other. I think that is what we have to expose our youth to, the movement and like the power of organizing.
I believe that we have to stop putting young people at the kiddie table and start acting like seriously, because that's what we do. You know, we say if you can become part of the group, you can become part of the group, you go sit over in the corner. And you know, a couple of weeks ago when we started hearing about the revolutions, you know, you watch the news and you hear this is a youth revolution. You know, so are most of the revolutions. And there's a reason for that, because the older you get, the harder it is to be part of that movement part of this thing. And you know, even if the movement doesn't begin with the youth often infiltrate that movement and change the direction of it. So we talk about the 1960s and we talk about the March on Washington. Now Randolph had been trying to do this March on Washington for a long time, and it hadn't happened. We know that. And then, you know, young people in America had gotten so upset that they were threatening the March on Washington. That's what really happened. And so they were threatening the march, but there was nobody who was going to direct that march. And so people had to say to people who were looked at as leadership, we need you to help slow this march down. We need you to make this a little more tame. And that's not to say they didn't do some good things, but it's because those young people were going to do what they were going to do that you had that march actually come to fruition. And so we have to start talking about the real history in this country. Because when I got into activism, I had people try to put me at the kiddie table too. They didn't want to hear what I had to say. But these young people have some ideas that can change the world. You know, these young people are not like people, even my age and older. They grow up in a completely different environment than people grew up in. They grow up in an environment where hip hop permeates, which means they have a different way of thinking about the world. These people grow up where remixing is the way that you do things. Back in the day, you had a song, the song was no good, the song went away. Today, the song's no good, you change that song. You change the people rapping on the song, or you change the music track under the song, but that's how they think of things, and that permeates the way that they treat this world. And so, if we're going to have people who are able to look at a problem and analyze it in a different way, we might want to get some of those minds into the movement. And the other thing we might want to do is actually be inspirational and stop just talking to these kids.
Yeah, wow, thank you for that. Do any of you have any further reflections? Anything you would like to share with us at this time?
Just want to make an invitation.
Sure.
So I just want to make an invitation. On March 30th, there's going to be a march at the Green for working people. March, we are trying to get 1,000 people to march to say we are not the problem. Working people are not the problem, and the solution to this economic crisis should not be paid by working people. And I just want to invite you all to come to that march. And I just want to tell you that I know that we need to work harder, because even though it's really inspirational what is happening all over the country, the conditions are more difficult than ever. And we need to work harder to like achieve what we want. So please come.
Who's organizing the march? Who's the organization doing the march?
It's a bunch of organizations from like the whole New Haven. So there's like Labor and Faith, CCNE is organizing it too. There's some like neighborhood organizations, and I'm pretty sure, I haven't asked well, but like I'm pretty sure that like the PeoplesCenter will be there too.
Where? What time?
5:30 at the Green on March 30th. I'm pretty sure it's a Wednesday.
Facebook it.
Support the history of our people as well as the labor movement, and to hear this phenomenal panel talk earlier. This is such an important cause. I asked actually if I could read this poem because Several months ago, Ms. White was honored as a legendary woman here in the city of New Haven by a group called Perfect Blend. And I wrote poems for all 12 of the women who were honored. And this poem I wrote in honor of Ms. White, and I thought it would be important or appropriate to read it here. And the poems were based on the concept, if you remember about 6 years ago, Oprah Winfrey did We Speak Your Name. And she honored women who they felt were legendary. And so we pulled the same concept in terms of what we were trying to do. Ms. Lula White, we speak your name. Born in Eufaula, Alabama, raised in New Haven, Connecticut, educated in Chicago, Illinois, came of age in Jackson, Mississippi. Childhood memories of segregated fountains, clothing stores with no fitting rooms for colors. It was just the right thing to do. Always interested in history and politics from afar, but not too far. Becoming president of the college NAACP chapter, successfully finished college, waiting to start graduate school. But destiny called as you sat quietly watching the news. Northern sister can't believe this report of Southern shame. An angry mob of segregationists setting a bus aflame. A bus filled with people riding for freedom and justice. Enraged, you knew there was no cause for this. It was then and there you heard the Freedom Riders call. You packed your bags and headed south to heed the call. One postcard to your father you quickly penned, informing him of your dangerous summer stint. 2 months, 60 days of imprisonment for a just cause, living out your principles against the racist Jim Crow laws. Thank you for being a freedom rider in '61. Thank you for the victories your actions have won. History teacher for over 30 plus years. Who knew one day when your story was told that your life would be the history we'd unfold? When justice seemed nowhere in sight, you knew it was your constitutional right. Colored only, white only, long time gone, all because you lived out freedom's song. Lula White, we speak your name.
Thank you so much. And we